Hey, welcome to WACTS. This is episode 2. We're going to cover what I did from January 11th to January 17th, 2015. We got a lot of stuff this episode as well. Big surprise. Whoa. Actually, a lot of this episode I'm going to be talking about making last week's episode because, hey, surprise, that's what I did for a lot of last week. Also, you can see the other stuff I'm going to be talking about in the topics and the description section. And also, if you're looking down in that area, you might notice that the titles for these videos are kind of weird. I don't know what to call them. If you have any ideas, let me know. For now, I'm just going to pick something that I like from the week that I'm talking about and say that's the title of the video. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because people are going to be Googling like, oh, look, someone did a 35-minute Birdman review and things. I'm going to go really in-depth about it, and then, they see I only talk about it for like 2 minutes and they're going to be angry, and I'm going to get a bunch of negative likes and it'll be terrible. What's a negative like? I guess that's a thumbs down. Okay, anyway, let's get right to it. Let's get right to it. Yeah. Architecture. So I'm not going to talk a lot about what I do at work, but this week I'm doing some interesting things with what are called operable partition walls, one of the theater projects we're doing in London. We're looking at taking a pretty large space and actually dividing it into 3 smaller spaces. So it's my first time kind of looking into manufacturers for operable partition walls, which are basically, motorized devices that can either come down from the ceiling or out from a closet in the side and divide up a space. You see it in like conference centers sometimes, or smaller spaces than that. And it isn't done actually a lot in very large theaters. So there's something very interesting about taking a predominantly horizontal long space and finding ways to divide it into smaller spaces. And we've been looking at the skyfold system, which is something that kind of goes vertically. And every time I hear that manufacturer, all I can think is, with the skyfold, the room crumbles, or it stands tall. It all folds up together with the skyfold. We're also looking at huffcore, which is horizontal. Don't have a song for huffcore. And that's just kind of, you need a closet off to the side and it can kind of come in. But it's been kind of interesting researching that. And what's also been great is this kind of goes in the software category of my videos, but it's been really cool to animate again and find ways to take a bunch of partitions, really simple boxes that I'm modeling, and get it to animate to fold up in like an accordion system, and also in a way that's actually going to show how much space it'll take up when it's all folded up together. I'm going to give operable partition walls a rating of 4 stars with a confidence rating of 0 because that's a ridiculous thing to rate. Virtual reality. So last week I spoke with Ryan Mast over at Tait Towers. He's a multimedia artist and director. He's had his own companies in the past, but now works for them kind of in the head of their, make crazy stuff happen department. And Tait Towers, again, it's this company that works with a lot of big concert artists, Justin Timberlake, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, when they want to do some really enormous spectacles and not only have them happen once, like at the VMAs or something like that, but when they go on tour. And so that needs to be something that's going to work just as well in New York or Germany and Japan. It needs to disassemble very quickly. It needs to come back out and, usually get put together by someone that doesn't speak English. So a lot of times they really can't even bother with instructions. You just need to have it be intuitive, like a red peg goes into a red hole, etc., etc. So that can involve robots, sets, crazy visuals, and Ryan and I talked about a lot of things, but just for the section of VR here, I just want to mention that what's another great use for the Oculus Rift is they're able to put this on an artist's face, someone that's going to be performing with like robots and all sorts of crazy stuff around them, and be like, don't panic, this is what's actually going to feel like, and they can get the sensation of movement, of things happening around them. They can figure out blocking and exactly when cues need to happen. So just another great use for the Oculus Rift, being able to simulate a concert experience. And it's a nice contrast to what I'm doing. Most of what I'm doing for work is looking at the audience experience, and this is actually kind of the other side of that, looking at what it's like for the performer and finding a way to make things work on their side. I did a little bit of that for Macbeth at the Park Avenue Armory, but this is a much more in-depth way of doing that, especially because so much of what Tait Towers does is basically unprecedented. It's huge and, costs millions and millions of dollars. So talking about Oculus, what's really nice is that they have a software called Navigator, which can talk to all these other different programs. They use AutoCAD, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, and basically you can have data or whatever kind of input coming in from one thing, go into Navigator, and then output it to whatever they need it to, whether it's going to be something controlling robots or visuals or smoke or whatever the case may be. So cool stuff Tait Towers is doing. It's weird to rate this, but I did see actually the Justin Timberlake concert last year, the 2020 experience, through my office. I did not buy tickets myself, and it was actually really cool to see this stage that Tait Towers designed that was able to sweep out over the entire audience, and just made it a very, kind of intimate experience for all of Madison Square Garden. So it was exciting to see that. So I'm just giving Tait Towers and all the cool stuff they do and wacky technology 5 stars with a confidence of 4. Video games. So another PS2 game this week, I got the Tait Towers, which again is a game I used to play back in the day, 2002, 2003. And that was one that my brother and I loved playing because there's like a co-op mode where, you know, I might be Aragorn and he'd be Legolas and we'd go through and battle together. There's a really innovative combat system in place which still hasn't really been emulated as far as I know, where basically you build up kind of you know, an energy level, and then once you reach a threshold you go into kind of like a supersonic Hyper Knuckles kind of thing, where every kill is very simple and quick, and all your kills are rated from fair to good to excellent to perfect. And there are certain moves you can do that automatically provide like an excellent kill. There's one move that just is an automatic kill for, you know, almost any guy, assuming you've purchased it with experience points. But anyway, yeah, so there's an interesting system in place where you can just kill a lot of guys very quickly and rack up a lot of perfects, and then you get a bunch of experience points at the end. And that in itself is a cool system, and I'd love to see that explored in more ways. But the game itself, I just played a few levels, and it wasn't quite as fun as I remember. The fighting system is a little bit more monotonous, repetitive than I remember it being. Some of the levels, there will be a really exciting part, and then it's just kind of a slog, because you just have like 1,000 orcs coming at you. And, you know, I mean, I guess that's kind of an experience of what it felt like in the movie, but, you know, the combo system, which should be really intuitive and fun, you know, I'd memorize these combos, and it's just so hard to execute them, because a lot of them require like 4 buttons or something, and it's not like you can just be like XX triangle circle. You know, you have to think about the amount of time it actually takes for the move to work, and if you get knocked down or something during that, then the combo just dies. You can't do anything more with it. So a lot of times I just found myself doing the Bane moves, Orc Bane, Uruk-hai Bane, Isildur's Bane, whatever, the different ones where you basically just grab a guy and slit his throat, and, you know, that gives you an excellent, but it doesn't build up to that perfect mode where you can be killing a lot of guys really quick. So that's kind of a shame. One cool thing, because I'm someone that's watched the Lord of the Rings appendices like 5 or 6 times, is I totally forgot that on the Tait Towers disc and the Return of the King PS2 disc, there's all sorts of little bonus special feature things. They talk about, you know, the voice actors or the actors from the movie are talking about doing voice acting for the game, and how, you know, it's much easier than all the prosthetics and makeup and everything they have to do, which actually kind of speaks to the way video games have evolved, because now there's, you know, all sorts of equipment that video game actors need to put on to do the facial capture and motion capture and all that. But back then it was all the animators who were doing everything. You know, they might do some like a little bit of motion capture or reference for, you know, the way Viggo's moving. He talks about in the videos like working with the stuntman to get Viggo's movements in the video game down, but really, you know, all they had to do was provide the voices. So you just have like Ian McHale in there being like, oh, you, and you know, it seems really like they had a lot of fun with it. So I love that behind the scenes stuff, so that was really cool. So the Tait Towers, still fun. It's kind of cool how there aren't any games nowadays that seem to have built off of that as far as I know, so it still has kind of a novel quality to it that I like. I'll probably go back to it and play it for like 10-minute chunks, you know, whenever I feel like it. So for now I'm just giving it 3 stars with a confidence rating of 4. So I actually haven't played a lot of the video games I was playing last week, except for The Last of Us. I've gotten further in that. I'm kind of spoilery warning here, not really, but just minor spoilery warning if you want to know absolutely nothing. Here we go. I've gone from Boston to Pittsburgh, and the sequence going from there really kind of picked up the pace of the game for me a little bit. Maybe I just find myself more interested in competing against like human players than the zombie players, but now that I'm in Pittsburgh and there's been a lot more of the people there, that's been kind of interesting. I also want to mention that this new section of the game gave me a crazy nightmare, because as you might know if you've played the game, you come into Pittsburgh and, you know, this kind of trap is set for you and you kind of get veered off into the city, and a bus comes and hits you, and all these guys try to kill you right off the bat, and it's a really exciting sequence. And that gave me this crazy nightmare where I found myself like riding a bike through checkpoints that looked a lot like checkpoints from the game, and there's like this huge cloud of smoke behind me, and it looked like something that would be like from the Reavers from like Firefly, and all I'd find is I'd be biking along this road, and then I'd just hear like these distant screams from the checkpoint I just left, and then I'd make it to the next city, and everyone would be like, where are you going? Why are you going so fast? And I'd just like ride right through the city, go past the checkpoint. Maybe I was yelling, no, get out, save yourself, or maybe I was being totally selfish, I don't remember. But I kept going, and then I'd hear the next one, kind of everyone would be screaming and all the smoke would clear, and then finally I got stuck in a city where there was just nowhere to go, and I had that horrible feeling of seeing this cloud of smoke and this monstrous, you know, tower of God knows what coming toward me, and then I experienced just like all these creatures like coming out of it at once and just destroying everything and everyone in the city. And then I woke up, because usually when things get that terrifying in my dreams, I wake up, thank God, except for a couple times where I jumped off a cliff because I thought that would wake me up in a dream, and then I fell to the ground and I hit the ground, and then actually I just stayed awake for like 2 dream hours in the dream being like, oh my god, my whole body's broken and I'm in a ton of pain, and I didn't think that could happen in dreams. Luckily that hasn't happened in a few years. The Last of Us, yeah, I'm enjoying that it feels a little bit more stealthy now. The stuff with the people makes it so that there's a little bit more, you know, running for cover, getting behind things. I've gotten better with the bow and arrow and upgrading some of my weapons. My hunting rifle has a scope now, so that's all made the game more interesting, more fun to me. I really love the relationship between Ellie and Joel and how that's progressing, so that's been great. So I'm upgrading my previous star rating. I'm going 4 stars now with a confidence of 4. A quick game that hasn't come out yet, I know nothing about it, just wanted to throw it out there. There's a game coming out called No Man's Sky that looks like it's going to be an incredible MMO where you have like a procedurally generated huge universe that all these different people play in, but it seems like the universe is going to be so gigantic that it'll be incredibly rare that you actually run into other people. And you'll land on planets that are, you know, totally desolate, just deserts or ice. You'll land on some planets that have some plant life but nothing else, and some planets that actually have possibly some sentient life at, you know, a very rare occasion. So there seems to be a pacing and a subtlety and a quietness to a game like that that really appeals to people like myself and my wife, that sometimes just, if we're playing in a game like that, we don't want to interact with other people, and it's kind of nice to think that that could be a very rare thing. And maybe it's exciting when it happens, because unlike a lot of MMOs, you wouldn't have people just around you all the time and being like, join my guild, let's go on a battle, so that could be really great. I know nothing about this game right now, but it sounds really cool. I think it could be great. For now, I'm giving it 5 stars with a confidence of 1. Podcasts. I listened to Girl on Guy with Aisha Tyler. That's a podcast she does just talking to usually guys. I think there have been a few girls on there. But talking to Joel McHale, who I know from Community and The Soup. I remember watching The Soup a little bit as a kid. Didn't really like it that much, but I thought he was great on Community, even though it took me a little while to get into Community. It was one of those shows I had to watch like 3 times before I really got it and it clicked into place, and now I love it and can't wait to see whatever the heck Yahoo's doing with it. But anyway, it was a great interview. You know, Joel talked about everything from growing up dyslexic and not thinking he had the ability to be good at certain things, and kind of finding acting and kind of that lovely story of rising up through the ranks of commercials and other projects until, you know, landing where he is now. 4 stars, confidence 4. I listened to 3 interviews from the Nerdist this week. I listened to a lot of stuff on the Nerdist. They interview the best people. So right off the bat, I'll say the one that I'm not done with yet. I just started listening to Lisa Kudrow's episode. I had no idea who Lisa Kudrow was for a while. I started watching The Comeback a few months ago since the new season was getting some press, and I enjoyed that show a lot. I buzzed through the first season and then caught up with the second season right as the final episode happened. I loved the idea of it. It was really cool, and it was actually interesting for me since I wasn't able to really grasp the meta level of it, of how, you know, Lisa had this career on Friends, and I guess, you know, she never really needed a comeback, like she was working that whole time. But anyway, still great show, a lot of fun. So far, I like hearing everything that Lisa's talking about. It's kind of cool how HBO, I guess, actually approached her and her producing partner being like, hey, do you guys have an idea for the show? We really love it from what it was back in the day. Hey, HBO, when we canceled you, that wasn't really HBO. That was like a bad couple of years when HBO wasn't really HBO. So it's kind of cool to hear that. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it. For now, I'm just giving it 4 stars with a confidence of 3. Next Nerdist episode I listened to was Joe Perry, the guitarist from Aerosmith. Guess what? My dad's band from many years ago actually used to tour on the same circuit as Aerosmith back in like New Hampshire and Vermont and that kind of thing. So it was always great hearing my dad's stories about that, and very cool to hear from Joe Perry's mouth a lot of similar stories about, you know, coming up in that area and the way the band developed. He's kind of a flat storyteller. He rambles a little bit. It was kind of a meandering podcast with some great nuggets in it, though. I loved hearing about when he was taking his break from Aerosmith. I think this was when he was doing the Joe Perry project, which my dad said was absolutely terrible, just incredibly loud guitar, you couldn't understand anything happening. That's actually when he met his wife. Like, his wife actually just saw him playing in a club and was like, you could have talent, and didn't know anything about his history with Aerosmith. And, you know, I think Joe was already divorced once or twice, but at this point they've been married for a very long time, and it's kind of nice to think that even though he was in a really rough patch in his life, that's when he met his wife and everything got a lot better. And, you know, he always seemed like kind of a rock star-y kind of guy, and yet I guess he actually never really had groupies or anything like that. Like, he actually took his wife and his children on tour with him. He got his own bus eventually, and really kind of embraced that lifestyle, as did his family. So they're still doing great. I was a huge Aerosmith fan growing up, but I remember listening to all their albums and going through some of the ones like Done With Me mirrors and whichever one back in the saddle was on and being like, something seems a little bit off here. And I think that's when they were really deep into the drugs, and it was affecting everything from them playing live to what they were recording. So very interesting to hear Joe Perry talk a lot about what it was like for them all to clean up. For him, he mentions having this realization that he's like, wait a minute, when I was a kid and I really got into music, I wasn't high then. Like, I appreciated it as a sober person, and I guess that was one of those things that kind of led him back into sobriety. So that was really interesting to hear. I give this interview, mostly because of its meandering quality, 3 stars, confidence rating of 5. Finally, one of my favorite Nerdist podcasts I've heard so far, and I've heard probably over 200 of them, was Gillian Anderson from The X-Files. My wife and I are both huge fans of her. We watched almost everything she's done over the years, and she's just a delight. She has such a bright kind of charismatic personality, talking very frankly about all her experiences. There's no kind of facade up, no sense that she's trying to put out a certain personality because she's talking to the press or whatever. I don't know if she considers the Nerdist the press, but they got some really cool stuff going. Like, I think they actually started like an X-Files 2015 movie. Gillian kind of put it out there that she'd be interested, and she thinks David would be interested, and Chris Carter would be interested. And now I just saw news yesterday that Fox is like, yeah, we're exploring doing a little X-Files mini-series, kind of the way they did 24, and that would be fantastic. A couple of the X-Files stories, and I'll just say I was a huge X-Files fan as a kid, even though I didn't get to watch the final episode because one of my brothers had to watch another movie that night, and he had reserved the TV, so I never got to see the final episode of the X-Files. That's okay. I've kind of gotten over it. It's on Netflix now. I could watch it anytime. I don't know why I haven't yet. But anyway, Gillian talks about, how early on she actually really felt like she was going to be fired a lot. And it was kind of brought up a couple times, like, you're on the verge of getting fired. And this was because, first of all, she was 24. She had said she was 27. Not that that made a huge deal, I'm sure. But, she was kind of the one that always had to explain everything to big dum-dum Mulder. And so she had to memorize all this, medical terminology. She was a doctor. She was working for the FBI. And there was just a lot to memorize, and I think at first she was trying to understand everything that she was saying so she could say it with a certain level of authority or confidence, and then it got to the point where there's just no way to do that when they were shooting for 15 hours a day, and then she had like 4 hours to go memorize her lines and then catch 2 hours of sleep or whatever. So she just had to just start memorizing the lines and accepting that she had no idea what mitochondrial biomedical chemical she was talking about. So that was really cool. Gillian Anderson, we're going to be talking more about her in a second, but for this particular Nerdist podcast, it was great. Particular, 5 stars, confidence rating of 5. Television. So we're just talking about Gillian Anderson, watching The Fall right now, season 2 on Netflix. It was just released on Friday, I think, and we've already buzzed through 4 out of the 6 episodes. It's been really good this season. The first season was a little bit kind of slow for me. I mean, maybe it was because I was kind of watching it in the background. I wasn't appreciating it in the level that I should, but I remembered enough from what happened in the first season to feel prepared going into the second season, and it's been great. There's been a lot of plot developments. It's a great character study. Like, I love the fact that, so many hours into it, you still don't know that much about the killer, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but the way that that's just slowly being pieced out without feeling like, a stereotype or a cliche has been really fascinating. What the show really is for me, more than any kind of crime story or procedural, because I've never been into shows like CSI or Law & Order, it's a character study, and that's what I liked about a show like True Detective, for example. It's fascinating to have some people in interesting, high-pressure situations and see how they react and really feel like it's a believable development for that character. So watching Gillian Anderson and whatever his name is, who's going to be in 50 Shades of Grey, which, by the way, in the second season, if you didn't get it from the first season, the second season really starts to show how he got cast in that role. Jamie Dornan, I think that's his name. How, it's kind of a similar role, and I hope the guy doesn't get typecast. He's a really good actor in this, and it'd be great if he does some non-weird sexual stuff in a show or a TV show or a movie or whatever. So far, The Fall's been great. I look forward to watching the final 2 episodes. For now, I'm giving it 4 stars with a confidence rating of 4. Also on Netflix, I started doing something a little bit earlier than I was planning on, but for the final season of Mad Men, the final half season, I wanted to rewatch the entire series. Most of the episodes I'd only seen once, so starting right from the first season, I'm just kind of plowing through them. I'm kind of worried that I'm going to get through them all before the new season starts in April, but that's okay. I'm through the first season now, and it was really cool to kind of go back and all these little subplots and character stories characters that I kind of totally forgotten about. It's really nice to see them again. You know, second time through, I'm actually finding Betty much more interesting as a character, knowing what happens with her and Don's relationship later on. Peggy has always actually been my favorite character arc of the whole show. I love how mousy and scared and weird in many cases she is at the beginning, and how there's actually still all the seeds of what she becomes later in the show very early on, and the whole thing with, you know, her gaining weight that first season and learning later what that's for. It's all great. The show did really right by recognizing how quickly Don Draper is a fascinating character. He's a character the audience wants to know more about, and you know, everyone can quibble over how his backstory has played out, and especially in the later seasons, but I think in the first season it's really well done. The little hints you get about his real name, a little bit about his history, and he just remains a very tantalizing, enigmatic character that really kind of pulls you through the show just on the interest of who he is and what he's going to do next and why he behaves the way he does. So Mad Men Season 1, I mean, I guess I'm just going to grade Season 1. We'll talk about it more when the final season happens and I can grade the series as a whole. But Season 1, I give it 5 stars with a confidence rating of 5. I've seen the first 2 episodes of Girls this year. This is a show that almost no one that I know watches, but I still find it fascinating. I don't like these characters. I would never hang out with them if I knew them personally, but I find it a fascinating character study in the same way that I find Walter White or Donald Draper an interesting person to see what they're going to do next. I find that's very much the case with the girls' characters. They do ridiculous things. They're absurd. They're irrational. I am not invested in their well-being in many cases, but I'm interested in what they do and why they do it and what the motivating factors are. And, you know, I mean, I guess in some ways, less than the characters themselves, I'm interested in the relationships between them. I'm interested in that relationship between Hannah and Adam, the relationship that Marnie and Jessa and all those girls have with their various boy toys and with each other. The relationships between them are fascinating. I'm fascinated to see what happens with Hannah at the Iowa Writers Workshop thing, which is a real thing, by the way, if you didn't know. Also Marnie with this weird relationship she's having with a musician, and he's cheating on his girlfriend with her and all that. Jessa, I don't really know what's happening with right now. Zosha Mamet's character, I can't really remember what's happening right now, but that sounds very unenthusiastic. I do enjoy the show. It is kind of appointment viewing for me. I think Lena Dunham is very talented, and I look forward to seeing where it goes this year. Girls as a whole, I give 3 stars with a confidence rating of 3 because it's something that I really don't know how I'm going to feel about in a few years, but as I'm watching it now, I like it. I watched the series premiere of Togetherness. It's a Mark Duplass show. Mark Duplass, I had no idea who he was until I watched The One I Love, which had Elizabeth Moss from Mad Men in it, and that was a really interesting movie. Had a kind of a Twilight Zone quality. I don't want to give it away, but it's on Netflix. Check that out if you want. Mark Duplass seems like a really fascinating guy because he writes and directs all this stuff with his brother, Jay Duplass, I think, and he tends to star in it. So Togetherness, I mean, I'll just say it didn't really strike me one way or another. I like the actors in it. I like Mark Duplass as an actor. I like Amanda Peet, she's in it. Everyone seems to have something interesting going on, but I don't know what the show wants to be yet. I don't know what it's driving at. I guess I understand the tone. It's kind of a standard HBO tone, but I'm just going to kind of reserve judgment on it for now. I'll watch the next few episodes, and if nothing about it strikes me in a particular way that fascinates me or pulls me in, maybe I'll give up on it. So for now, just based on the pilot, I'll give it 2 stars with a confidence rating of 1. I've seen the first 2 episodes of the new season of Archer. The reboot last season, I really wanted it to work. It didn't really pull me through. I'm excited to see it back in kind of the weekly episode kind of story environment. This is a show that I knew I was going to love right from the early trailers on FX, just that involved Archer shooting Barry or whatever, and that kind of personality. It was really fun to have this kind of silly, dumb, James Bondy kind of character there. So it's a show I really enjoy. I love the way Carol and Pam have developed over the series. It's just, there's an absurdist quality to it that's still very relatable, and it's funny, and I always look forward to it. First 2 episodes seem like standard Archer fare. There's nothing blowing me away about them, but, you know, I'm glad it's back in kind of its regular routine of, you know, here's the episode of the week, here's where things go, and totally makes sense that they no longer work for ISIS. I liked in the premiere, just kind of rolling it away, just no more ISIS. I guess they're like private contractors for the CIA now. Spoiler alert, sorry. Anyway, it's a great show. I'm enjoying it a lot. So for now, 4 stars, confidence of 3. I'm judging this season. I don't know how it's going to turn out yet. So late last night, going through Amazon Prime, saw, Amazon pilot season. I guess I saw it like right as it started. And so I watched a few episodes from their new pilot season, which, if you don't know, network TV, basically every year they produce probably hundreds of pilots across different networks, and they decide internally which ones to pick up and which ones to give episode orders to, and then, after airing a few, some get canceled, some get more episodes, and some get a new season. So Amazon is doing this in a very democratic way, and has been for a few now, ever since the year that alphas and betas started. It was just a weird coincidence that those were the 2 shows they picked up. But they're actually just picking what shows they're going to move forward with based on the reviews that customers like me, like you, give the different shows. And they're available for anyone to watch. You can just Google Amazon pilot season and watch like a little Geico commercial at the beginning and go right to it. But, I think it's gotten better every season. I wasn't a huge fan of anything in the first section of pilots. The second season last year, I loved seeing Transparent. The After was kind of interesting, the Chris Carter thing. Red Oaks looks really cool. I think they're going to move forward with that. And this season, I've watched 3 of them so far, and I think they're all great. Let's start right off with the New Yorker show. I actually have read very little of the New Yorker, surprising, since I've been in New York now for something like 4.5 years. But I get from watching the show, it probably is very much the visual equivalent of reading the New Yorker. You get some really cool little, cartoon sketches to break things up. You get a little short film. The one in the pilot episode has Alan Cummings. It's kind of meh. But then at the end, you get kind of like a feature-length article talking about this guy that basically was hired by a big chemical company to do research on how their chemical was affecting frogs, amphibians, things in wildlife, and he found it's doing terrible things to them, and then they were like, I don't think you have noble reasons for saying that. They thought he was being paid by someone else or something. They couldn't accept that he just wanted to tell the truth and be a good scientist. It was a good documentary, a little short documentary, but I wish it had focused more on his actual research. Instead, it focused mostly on his personal life and just kind of, here's what this guy's life is like and what a nice guy he is, and that's totally great, but I was more interested in his research and following that through a little bit deeper. So the New Yorker show looks like it could be good. I mean, my guess, if I had to guess, it's probably going to go the same way as their Onion show, the Amazon's Onion show, which I also thought was actually good and had some potential, but they didn't pick that up. I'm guessing this won't be picked up either. We'll see. Best of luck to it. I give it 3 stars with a confidence rating of 4. Watched The Man in the High Castle, which is based on a Philip K. Dick novel, and right away it felt very Philip K. Dick. All I've read of him is a few short stories. I've seen a lot of the movies based on his books, Minority Report, Blade Runner, etc., etc. And, most recently I actually read one called The Simulacrum, and it seems to me, and someone please correct me if this is wrong, but it seems like a lot of Philip K. Dick stories are interested in what would have happened if the Nazis won World War II. So this is one of those stories, and right off the bat, it is visually provocative, so fascinating to have these images of Times Square with a giant Nazi banner, or, the United States mapped out where all of the East Coast is the greater Third Reich or whatever, the greater Nazi Reich, and then the middle is kind of this neutral territory. And on the West Coast, you have the Japanese Pacific States, and just this kind of alternate reality where, what if the Nazis had won World War II? And, the characters are very interesting right off the bat. Of course, it's clear that there's a rebellion going on. There's a group that's trying to, propagate this idea that maybe actually America did win World War II or something like that. There's footage, which I think is real footage from our reality of winning the war, and they're finding that and being like, wait, what is this? There's people celebrating in New York, and it seems like we won. And then you're kind of following this guy that's undercover, kind of traveling across the country, and he meets up with someone from the other side of the country. So you kind of have these 2 protagonists, sort of. That's the impression I'm getting, though by the end of the episode, no spoilers, maybe you're not sure. But it's a really interesting show. I totally recommend you check it out. Again, the production value is very high. It really feels like this is an alternate America where this happens. And there's a lot of just really incredible little moments. There's a guy who gets stopped by a cop, and it starts snowing, and he's like, oh, why is it snowing? And the cop's like, oh, it's Tuesdays. That's when we burn the cripples and degenerates. And just kind of this really terrifying idea of yeah, what what if Nazi ideas of how society should be handled just kind of made their way into America and percolated throughout society. I love alternate reality situations. You know, I loved a show called Fringe back in the day, which back in the day, it was like 4 years ago or something, but that idea where you can be like, oh, what if this one little thing was different, and then that splits off and follow it all throughout, you know, different timelines. So I recommend the show. Check that one out. I'm giving it for now 4 stars with a confidence rating of 3. Third pilot that I've watched so far is called Mad Dogs. This is one of the best pilot episodes of something I've ever seen. Like, regardless of what the show turns out to be, it's just a very well done pilot that establishes the premise of the story, sets up the location, sets up the characters. By the end of the episode, you absolutely know who all these characters are. Without giving too much away, the basic premise is you have these guys that all knew each other as kids. One of them has become very, very wealthy, has this gorgeous villa in Belize, and he invites the other 4 guys to come down for a vacation and spend time with them. And things start to happen. So the show does a great job of starting you off in a place where you can just kind of be dazzled by the visuals and be like, oh, this is beautiful, and then kind of follow them down the rabbit hole of all these really weird things happening. There's an absurdist comedy element to it. You know, you have Steve Zahn, of course, who's great in that kind of stuff. Billy Zane as the friend who's bringing them all down. A guy I recognize from like Prison Break and some other shows. Great cast. They're all fantastic in their roles. And again, like right away, you know who you're empathizing with, you know who you're rooting for, you know who you're against, you know what you want to happen, and it really tugs at you when things don't play out the way you want them to. So I just think it's a really well done pilot. I really recommend you check it out. I think based on the reviews it's gotten so far, I think Amazon's going to pick this up. I really hope they do. I'd love to see how this story plays out further on. So 5 stars, confidence rating of 3 because it's just the pilot. Blocks! All I've been reading this week is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. I'm about halfway through. Golden Sun is the sequel to Red Rising, which was a book that was kind of a surprise New York Times bestseller last year. It's from an author named Pierce Brown who's out on the West Coast. The book was introduced to me before it became a big thing by a friend of mine, Andy, who had gotten a chat with Pierce, and it was this cool thing kind of hearing about the background of how this story came about. Pierce is a young guy, he's about my age, and a very talented writer. The story right off the bat, I'll say this is a story in a series that provokes a lot of different feelings in me. When I read the first book, I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. To me, right after finishing it, it felt to me like I just read a mashup of all sorts of things that had done what it was trying to do better. That may sound really harsh, but as I was reading it, I was like thinking, oh, it's like this moment from Game of Thrones, except Game of Thrones did that better. Oh, it's like this moment from Ender's Game, but Ender's Games did that better. Oh, everyone's talking like it's 300, and they're battling like it's 300, but okay, 300 didn't do that better. Red Rising did that part better. But anyway, so it's kind of going through and, you know, there's Harry Potter elements and Hunger Games elements, and it feels like it's pulling from all these different things, and it didn't feel to me like it was mixing those in a way that was producing some kind of new magic potion, to use a Harry Potter reference, or a magic reference, or whatever. But clearly it provoked something in me because, for God's sakes, I found myself making a Tumblr blog where I was just like memeing it and being like, hey, look at this quote from the book, and here's what it's like in Game of Thrones, and etc., etc. It was like an outlet for me. I just needed to get that out of my system, so check that out if you want. I haven't updated it since like March of last year. In fact, it was reading this book that actually led me to writing Dystopia Pia, which was that play that I had performed back in July of last year. Basically, I read this book and I was like, well, here's the formula that's being used here. I really want to, you know, do something with it and kind of take my own spin on it. So I kind of did a parody of not just Red Rising, but other stories that, you know, kind of follow that same pseudo-hero's journey pattern. That was a lot of fun to do. I'm going to edit Dystopia Pia together in such a way soon so that anyone that wants to watch the entire thing, it'll be online on YouTube. Now, the funny thing is I did my play, and then, of course, the second book just came out, and surprise, surprise, since my play was meant to be a complete story, and this is the second part of a trilogy, it was fun to see that there were some things that happened in the second book that, I don't know if you'd say I predicted them, but they're things that follow suit in my play. I don't want to be too spoilerly, but for example, I can say that, you know, one of the primary antagonists has a near-to-the-death battle with the hero, and then that ends with, you know, the bad guy being very nearly dead, but not quite dead.
He did not kill me. I just need medical attention very, very quickly.
Also, I don't know how many things have done this. It was kind of weird that we're sharing this in common, but we both have a character in a spaceship being like, oh god, there's nothing that can happen that will save my life. And the response is to jump out of that spaceship and fly into another spaceship, which, you know, seems like a crazy thing to do, but like a last-ditch effort, so. anyway, Golden Sun. I will say I'm enjoying it more than Red Rising. It feels to me like the characters are developing in some interesting ways. I think there's too many characters, honestly. Like when I read something like Game of Thrones, I feel like I'm able to keep track of the most important characters because of all the different points of view. You know the characters that are going to be around Cersei or Tyrion or, you know, Sansa or whoever the case may be. But here, because it's all from Darrow's perspective, now I'm finding that a lot of the characters feel like they're playing very similar roles in the overall arc of the story. And until something really drastic happens that makes them feel like their own people, I just feel like the show. I'm thinking of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. actually. That's why I said show. I was thinking of the two scientist characters, the British and the Irish one, that could have been combined at the beginning, but then they kind of split off and do their own thing. I kind of am feeling that same way right here, where at least as far as the second book goes, a lot of these characters feel like they're providing exactly the same role, and they could be combined, but who knows, maybe in the third book they're going to split off and do something more interesting, so that'd be great. The writing style is good. I feel like Pierce uses a lot of metaphors and, you know, very flowery imagery in places where he doesn't need to, but the pacing is fairly quick. Stuff happens. I almost find, without fail, that right as I'm starting to get kind of bored and something's starting to feel monotonous, something really big happens and it's a big plot reversal, so that's nice. Again, I'm about halfway through it, so I am looking forward to finishing the rest. I'm enjoying it well enough right now, so I'm giving it 3 stars with a confidence of 3. Movies. So speaking of stories that feel like they're derivative of a lot of other stories, I just finally watched Swingers, which is like Jon Favreau, who, you know, directed Iron Man and Elf, went on to do all sorts of great things. This was kind of his start. It was a script that he wrote. He starred in it. He's in there with Vince Vaughn, and it's a very charming kind of movie about, you know, a couple guys, one of whom is struggling to move on from a relationship that just ended, and they go down to Vegas and have some fun and come back, and he's, you know, trying to find love in all the wrong places. But it was a really sweet movie. It had a ton of movie references and all sorts of very clear homages to, like, here's something we're taking from Reservoir Dogs or whatever. But it was fun in a way, and very tongue-in-cheek, that in a way that I appreciated. So I enjoyed it a lot. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's definitely has its own flavor to it, even though it's not doing anything that hasn't been done before. It's really lovely. Heather Graham has a great little cameo at the end. I give it 3 stars with a confidence rating of 4. Kind of off that Jon Favreau kick of his early work. On the plane back from Germany in early August of last year, I was watching Chef on the plane, and I either fell asleep or the plane arrived before I was able to finish it, but I was enjoying it a lot of the time, so I didn't go back and rewatch the whole thing. I just watched the part at the end I missed, and, you know, all I'll say is it ended fine. It ended in a totally normal place. Thinking back over the movie, I feel like maybe it was missing a little bit of conflict. It's a great kind of coming-of-age father-son, you know, getting along with each other, finding common ground story. Reminded me a little bit of Kramer versus Kramer in that respect, but the stakes or the level of conflict and drama never quite felt ratcheted up quite enough for me. But again, I'll say this, Jon Favreau knows how to make a charming movie, and it was very sweet. I love the kid playing his son. I love the arc of his story from going from this chef that, you know, has kind of lost himself and kind of succumbed to all the worst tendencies of celebrity and high status, and then is trying to find himself again and does this food truck. I'm kind of giving the synopsis in a backwards way, but anyway, check out the movie. It's a lot of fun. I give it 3 stars with a confidence rating of 4. Also watched The Judge, starring Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Duvall, kind of going off Jon Favreau and that whole thing. Robert Downey Jr. also has a great little cameo in Chef, by the way. But in The Judge, this is the first movie that Johnny Depp, Robert Downey Jr. Is putting out with his wife in their personal studio. And it's a very intimate kind of movie, the kind that you don't see a lot of being made anymore. It's actually kind of in a similar vein to Chef, you know, kind of that mid-level, you know, maybe $10 million movie. And it's about Robert Downey Jr., who's this lawyer who's very high-powered and, you know, snazzy, kind of going back to his old town because his mother just died, and his father's there, and his father is a judge in this town, so big fish in a small pond kind of thing. And, you know, you just kind of see the way that Robert Downey Jr. and his father never got along. There's a lot of history there that still bites at them, and stuff with the brother, who is going to be a great baseball player. I don't want to give away too much, but there's a lot of very well-done interpersonal conflict that, I'll just say, you know, the reviews for this movie weren't great, and I was surprised now watching it that I actually think that a lot of the criticisms in there were unfounded. It did feel like a movie that had a lot of heart, a lot of honesty, and I totally understood where all the characters were coming from, and the system of watching Robert Downey Jr. with his father, and the way age was kind of taking him, and the deterioration of that, and this man that prided himself so long on withholding the law, upholding the law, and being good and just and what that means, and having to make certain compromises and sacrifices. I thought all of that was really exciting, very well done. Also has Vera Farmiga, who I have very mixed feelings about, maybe because she's from my school, from Syracuse University, and I know all sorts of weird stories from when she was there, but I love her in some things and hate her in others. Here, I think she's good, so great to see that. Enjoy it, check it out. The Judge, Robert Downey Jr., Robert Duvall, Vera Farmiga, great. I give it 4 stars with a confidence rating of 4. On HBO Go earlier in the week, I checked out 8 Mile, which I haven't seen since it first came out. I was a really big Eminem fan as a kid. I listened to all his early albums, really thought he was one of the most genius songwriters, lyricists in the world. Just his way with words and the way he was able to succinctly tell stories in really fascinating ways and touch on a lot of topics that none of the other artists I was listening to were covering. Was really great. He was really the only hip-hop artist that I was really into as a kid, and that was fascinating. So going back into 8 Mile, which as a kid I thought was a great coming-of-age story. I think I felt about the same way about it now. Like it still holds up. It's still a fascinating story of someone from the streets trying to reconcile his talent with his living situation and all the stuff going on with his mother and his daughter, and balancing all those life issues. Still a great, very unique kind of coming-of-age story. Very well acted. Eminem's actually very good in it. I give it 3 stars, confidence rating of 5. This week on Steven Soderbergh's blog, he posted a recut version of 2001: A Space Odyssey that he had done. Very embarrassing. I've never actually seen 2001: A Space Odyssey before, and for some reason, I guess, it's never come up on Netflix or Amazon or any of those streaming services, so it was never that there for me, and yet Steven Soderbergh, because he's Steven Soderbergh, was able to just post his recut version on Vimeo or something like that, and no one blinked an eye. So I was like, okay, here it is, I'll watch it. And so he boiled it down to 2 hours, which I think is a lot shorter than what's the original movie, like 3.5 hours. And I thought it worked really well. There were still some surprisingly long sequences, just like 15 minutes of visuals or something like that. And I totally see how this was the influence for so many great movies that came later. Interstellar now definitely visually feels like the successor to 2001. I don't feel bad about spoiling this because it's an old movie and I feel like I'm the last person who's seen it, but the stuff with Hal dying at the end is really kind of heartbreaking. It tugs at your heartstrings that this computer is being slowly pulled apart and becoming more and more base. And actually, I realize now that was clearly the influence for the way that you deconstruct certain AI pods in Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, for anyone who gets that reference. But, it reminded me, the way that Hal was dying reminded me a lot of like the volleyball in Castaway Wilson, or, the end of Toy Story 3. It's just these really powerful moments for inanimate objects where you're like, why is this affecting me so much? So that was really cool. I think the movie, with its implications of like, here's something that aliens planted 4 million years ago and that influenced the way that humans developed, and then we put a burglar alarm on the moon and that kind of like activated for the rest of space to know what's going on, and then once they get to Jupiter, suddenly you're in a people zoo. All that kind of stuff was a really novel kind of idea and reminds me of almost a Kurt Vonnegut short story, or maybe something Philip K. Dick would have done. So really cool movie. I might even go back and watch the original now that I have Steven Soderbergh's version to that felt like a really good introduction to that world. I'm curious what he cut, what he thought was essential to keep in there. So if you haven't seen 2001: Space Odyssey, I think Steven Soderbergh's edition is a great place to start, especially because it's streaming for free, legally, I guess. So check that out. Otherwise, go see the other one. 2001: A Space Odyssey, Steven Soderbergh edition, I give it 4 stars with a confidence rating of 3. Birdman. Oh wow, I had no idea what this movie was going in. Just, the Oscar nominations had just been announced and I was like, okay, let's give this a try. And I was so impressed by this movie. I've never seen anything like this before. The way that it felt almost like a play in the one-shotness of it all. The way it used the St. James Theater, everything from the rooftops to the backstage to the actual stage, and the way that time would transition where you kind of pan down a little bit and, a day would pass just in that little motion. So beautiful, and the technical wizardry of it was I just kind of had my jaw down the entire time. I thought the script was great, the acting was great. I never saw the Michael Keaton Batman, so I wasn't able to really grasp that meta level of everything, but he was great in the role. I know it wasn't written for him, so that was fantastic. The Birdman, the actual Birdman, Gollum thing he had going on, he reminded me of Will Arnett, which I think was great, like just almost a cartoony thing inside your head that's constantly egging you on, I thought was really fantastic. Especially with Edward Norton, I think things bounced really well between a grounded, very personal story to, you know, heightened absurdist comedy in some parts. It had everything, and I was just hooked the entire time. Like, I had to go to the bathroom several times and just couldn't, not several times, maybe once, but I just couldn't pull myself away from this. I just had to keep watching. So I think it was one of the best movies I've seen in a long time, and totally original. It reminded me a little bit of what it felt like watching Gravity, which, you know, I don't think holds up as well outside of theaters. And it's the same director of photography, by the way, but watching that in theaters was such a new experience. I thought the play he was doing was great. Just this whole arc of a celebrity trying to have like a comeback and thinking like, oh, Broadway's my vehicle to do that, and the New York Times reporter being like, no, absolutely not, was really lovely, and it happens a lot in Broadway. I'm involved enough in the theater world and different aspects of it and hearing stories that this kind of thing does happen all the time. The movie itself is a very well done, grounded representation of some of the personalities you meet in this world, what it's actually like in the days leading up to opening a big show like this on Broadway. Off-Broadway, quick story about my show from July, which was on 43rd Street, not that far off Broadway. It reminded me that when that festival was happening, my friend Dan, who was helping out with the show, was commenting on how most of the shows in that festival were sad families sitting at tables. And so I loved the fact that in Birdman, see that? There was just, that's the play for a lot of it. It's just a sad family sitting around a table. Of course, you know, there's the thing where Edward Norton and Naomi Watts are actually married, but then it's Michael Keaton and Naomi Watts in the play, and that relationship between like director and actor and writer and all those different things happening together. I mean, as someone that on a much smaller scale has played those roles, it was great to see it on a larger than life kind of level. And again, as someone who loves watching the second disc of like DVDs or, you know, the appendices in Lord of the Rings and how something like this gets made, it was lovely to get to have that experience of everything backstage and everything in the front stage and all the behind the scenes conflict. I think Zach Galifianakis was fantastic in this movie. Everyone was fantastic. Emma Stone, Edward Norton, Naomi Watts, Michael Keaton, they're all great. And watching that all play out, it was such a treat. I can't wait to see it again. Birdman, 5 stars, confidence of 4. Software. We're going to get delightfully meta for a weekend and talk about, in this video, the making of these videos. So last week I spent a lot of time just working on the video for the last episode, a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. You know, I have the green screen and that's relatively straightforward. It's just a $20 thing, but not that hard to pop into Adobe After Effects. Use some techniques I learned while working on Starship Icarus for Cracked to get that all working in such a way where I can like wave my hands and hopefully you're not seeing any green. And then using Adobe Premiere to do all the raw footage very quick. You know, cutting everything together. I've got a pretty good workflow in place. What took a lot of the time actually was just dropping in the backgrounds. When I'm working in After Effects, it's really kind of a pain to get audio playing, and so, you know, I wanted images to appear right as I said certain words. Mass Effect 1, Half-Life 1, whatever, and that was kind of hard actually. So I think the scrolling backgrounds, which I got to work in such a way where it's almost, the program is treating it like one background that's just scrolling non-stop the entire time, and sometimes there's a background and sometimes there isn't. But I think if I was doing that in Premiere, and I'm pretty sure there is a way to do it in Premiere, that would all be a lot easier because I'd just be able to hear the cues better. I also want to use the markers in that software better. Again, this category is really for only people who care about this kind of stuff, but putting together a video like this on a weekly basis, I want it to be fast, I want it to be fun. This is meant to be just a side project, and I think, you know, I've learned enough now just in the past week about getting the audio to happen correctly, about how to export quickly. You know, if a video is half an hour, I don't want it to take 14 hours to export. So I'm going to start using some shared multi-threading, multiple computer thing to export as frames, and that'll make things quicker. You know, I could do these videos at 720p and that would help it encode quicker, but I might as well do it at 1080. I think I'm going to be getting quick enough at this that I want that to be possible. I'm trying to do a nice neutral background. Maybe this will change over the time. I just want something there so you're not looking at a green screen or my bookshelf or whatever. There's a bookshelf behind there. You know, I want to have at least one image for every topic. Like I could have just had an image like this, like the way news is done. And now the news. But I just wanted something more dynamic and interesting than that. So I had the idea of having it be full screen, but then like opacities and fading forward and backward, but that seemed weird. So scrolling just seemed nice because that way, even if my big head is covering the images back there, if it's scrolling, you'll catch it over there or something like that. So that seems to be working for now. Let me know what you think. I have my background and I added this crazy outline thing to help delineate it so that I'm not blending too much into what's behind me. I like it. Maybe you don't. That's fine. I think it could possibly make me look like an electric cartoon character, but to each his own. In the description, I'm going to put a link to a Google Doc I've created that just kind of goes through a little bit of my green screen process, just in case you're someone who's trying to figure out how to do green screen on the cheap. I think my system works pretty well, so check that out. So Adobe and Premiere, when they're working great together, they're working great together. A lot of times they have some problems where they're not updating properly, or they're crashing, or they're taking 1,000 hours to render when they really shouldn't, and you have to figure out why, and you find out that there's something that's turned off in a clip but still for some reason is trying to render, and that's causing all the problems, and XMP data can get crazy, and formats in newer versions of After Effects get deprecated, so they're not used anymore. So there's a lot to keep track of. I'm doing my best, and it's fun. I love learning this stuff, and when things are going well, it's really satisfying. But, you know, I guess this is the software section, so I'm going to give both Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects 4 stars with a confidence rating of 2, because I have no idea how it's going to feel the more I learn about these programs. Board games! My wife and I are huge fans of a card game called Race for the Galaxy. This is a card game that started out actually as a card game version of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is one of those gateway European games like Settlers of Catan that's not very complicated, but a nice way to get someone from the world of Monopoly to the world of more interesting games like Power Grid and stuff like that. So anyway, Race for the Galaxy, we have the first 3 expansions. We play that all the time. We've probably played 50 or so games. We love it a lot. It can be very quick. It's great with 2 players. We've played it with up to 4. Also great there. Doesn't take long to set up. That's all great. That's 5 stars, confidence 5, whatever. We started playing the newest expansion, which came out not that long ago. It's called Alien Artifacts, and the first 3 expansions were meant to be like an arc of a story or something that all work within that universe. This new expansion basically says, take out all the other expansions, start fresh, this is going to be something entirely different. So we spent some time going through all the cards which we'd mixed together and taking out the other expansions. And this new one has a system which is kind of interesting called orb exploring, where basically during the explore phase, which is the first phase, in addition to doing everything you would normally do in the game, there's this orb which becomes this little like board that's being developed on in front of you, where you're exploring stuff there and picking up some abilities. And when we were trying to figure out how to play, we watched Tom Vassel's Tait Towers review of this expansion, and he made it very clear that he did not like this expansion at all. He likes the new cards, but not the new mechanics, and it slows down the game a ton. And after watching that, my wife and I were like, okay, well, let's try it anyway and see what happens. And I don't think we were quite as negative about it. We did find it was slowing down the game, but I honestly think there's a few simple house rules that can make this a lot easier. Like, for example, one of the hardest things is when you're exploring this orb territory, you have to put down a card and it needs to match up in just a certain way with the other cards. We relax those rules, whatever, if you're opening up a wall or blocking a wall or overlapping something you're not supposed to. We try to keep it pretty simple. I think in the future, actually, what we'll do even is we'll just set all that up beforehand. Like, just let it exist there. Let it be like a pre-set up Catan board kind of thing. Have your explorers start somewhere, and then just, you know, during that explore phase, just go off and collect things. It should really be a bonus. I think it should be an extra thing that adds some interest to the game and doesn't take away. The cards, though, I think all the cards are great. They're really powerful. I think maybe the game wants to move a little bit faster, so they made some of the cards, you know, up your military and up your development powers a lot quicker. And technically, you're not supposed to use the other expansions, and I think it would be kind of hard because of the balancing issues and that kind of thing. But I would still, next time we play, I think we're going to throw the objectives back in. The objectives, which I can't remember which expansion they're from, are a really nice way to help focus your energies in the game. You get a lot of cards in this game, and you constantly have to be spending them, and the cards are great because they play 12 different roles in the games in a fairly intuitive way, I'll say. And what's useful about the objectives is that they give focus to which cards you decide to keep and which ones you spend and discard. And so, you know, if I have a powerful alien card and a powerful rebel card and a powerful uplift card, and there's an alien objective on the board, then I'm going to preference that alien card and maybe not worry about the other ones so much. Without the objectives, everything can feel a little bit aimless, or you just need to have a much better idea of how all your different cards are working together. And there's so many cards in this game, I don't plan on ever memorizing them all no matter how much I play. Those can be useful to just kind of focus your efforts a little bit. So anyway, I think that with our house rule version of the game, I think it'll be a lot easier because we're just going to be a little bit more relaxed about some of the things they want you to do with the orb exploring. We really want it to be just a little extra fun thing that happens and doesn't slow the game down too much. So it'll be more about just moving around and collecting things and less about placing stuff, which is kind of weird because if you're exploring this place, then why do you get to have a say in how it's developed? That's all kind of weird. Anyway, so I think it's a game that it's tough to rate because as it stands, I'd probably give it like 2 stars, the expansion on its own, but then if I'm thinking about the game as it ties to the rest of Race of the Galaxy, which I really love, which is 5 stars, or do I grade it on the house rules? It's all a silly system, so whatever. I'm going to give it 4 stars with a confidence rating of 2 because we're going to keep playing, and I think from here on out I'm just going to play with our house rules version and we'll see how that feels and if we can start to incorporate some of the other expansions back in just the way we do things. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this video is out a little bit sooner this week than it was last week. If it's out on like a Tuesday, then I think I'm doing okay. If it's out on like a Sunday or something like that, then my God, what's gone wrong? I don't know. Some things I'll probably be talking about next week, finishing up The Fall, reading the rest of Golden Sun. I'm going to be playing a game created by a friend of mine whose real name is Richard Funkhauser, by the way. I'm going to be printing out some prototypes for that and trying out the board gamey stuff that he's got going on there. And I'll be playing Seven Wonders, which is a game I already like quite a bit, with the Leaders expansion. So I'll let you know what I think about that. On my blog this week, definitely check out Terra Deluxe. That game turned out really well. I think it's gorgeous. Artwork by Alice Blank, box art by Morgan Shaw, other stuff by Dan King and myself. Beautiful looking game. I also did a post about the experience a little bit more in depth of making my Sims film. Speaking of which, this week and every week from now on, I think I'm going to be posting just a couple of my videos here at the end of this video if you want to check out. So to start, let's look at my Sims video, which was based on a play I had in a festival at The Brick called Tiny Theater Festival in Brooklyn a couple years ago. Nick Douglas of Slackatory was like, hey, I want to make this a short film, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we did it, and there's that. And it's based on the video game The Sims. And then this is just a little video that I made when I was watching Lord of the Rings and looking at the Mouth of Sauron guy and was like, hey, it's kind of like, the scars from Batman Dark Knight, whatever. Check that out. That's a very short one. Hope you enjoy that. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you next week. Yay.